Hi, everybody. Today is Thursday, July 31st, 2025, and our friend Alex Krainer is back with us. Welcome back, Alex.
Thank you, Nima. Good to be with you, and warm greetings from Croatia to all your viewers and listeners.
I want to start with a fundamental question, Alex, considering the Trump administration. It seems that we're back to a square one, and you look at this situation in Ukraine, in the Middle East, nothing has changed. Steve Witkoff 2 days ago came out and said that we are trying to make a deal with Russia. We are optimistic about it. About Iran, we are trying to do something. In the Middle East, we are trying to break a deal, Abraham Accord. Do you feel that is that affordable for the United States to make peace, in your opinion?
I do think so, Nima, and I think it's extremely difficult to judge what Trump has up his sleeve because his habitual modus operandi is obfuscation and deception. And for as long as I've paid attention to Trump, it's been that way. It's um, he's saying something and then he does something else. Um, I recognize that at this moment in time, probably most people are profoundly disappointed in Trump, and that the feeling that he's betrayed his voters and the MAGA base is widespread. But I'm not convinced that this is this is the reality of things. That nothing is what it seems. And so I would be very careful about judging Trump because it is very hard for me to believe that he would now suddenly, after all this time of having a certain position and certain mission with his presidency, that he would suddenly pivot back to being the global hegemon and the enforcer of the global empire. I would be more open-minded with the idea that maybe, Trump being Trump, he's interested in replacing, putting the United States in the driver's seat of the global empire. Because let's face it, it's been the British have been in the driver's seat. And now maybe he wants to take that position and impose himself as the dominant power in the world, and maybe dictate terms to Russia, China, Iran, India, and so forth, or at the very least approach all these negotiations and deals from the most powerful possible position. But the idea that he just went back to the same place where Joe Biden left off, that I don't believe. And so all this rhetoric might end up being what we got during his first term, when, remember, there was a war of words between him and Kim Jong-un. Mm-hmm. And there was a period of time where it seemed that the United States was going to go to war with North Korea, that they were going to bomb North Korea, but that didn't happen. Instead, at the very same time when he was engaged in that war of word, and it was usual Trump style, rash and vulgar and shooting nonsense of the hip through the social media. But at the same time, he sent a delegation of his representatives and military generals to South Korea and to China to prepare the ground to meet with Kim Jong-un. And then they held that meeting, and they had a good meeting, and they had a great relationship, and he was the first U.S. president to set foot into the demilitarized zone between North and South Korea. And then, we had a the beginnings of peace emerged between the two Koreas. They started demining the demarcation lines, and so with respect to today's circumstances, I suspect that we are now in that period of the war of words. Trump just went to Scotland, to Britain, right? Where he met with Ursula von der Leyen and he met with Keir Starmer. And I think that some of his statements were meant for that audience, to give his allies, quote unquote, the impression that he's still on board with them, that he still considers them important allies. Why is he doing that? I think not because he's interested in going to war against Iran or Russia or bringing the United States back into being the empire's enforcement force, but because I think he wants to negotiate advantageous deals for the United States. He wants to sell them a lot of U.S. weapons, and so you're not gonna do that if you give them a clear, definitive signal that you're abandoning them and that you're no longer their ally. Because then they're going to turn inward. They're going to be starting to develop their own weapon systems, and they're no longer going to be as dependent on the United States as they are. At the moment, they still look at Trump as their daddy. They still want favors from him. They're still willing to twist themselves into a pretzels to get favor with Trump and with the United States. And so I think that he's exploiting this. And we've seen that he's been very effective at exploiting this in his meeting with Ursula von der Leyen, who accepted a total and complete humiliation at Trump's hands. And so I think this is the game he's playing. Apart from that, there's his position and his government's position has been consistent that the post-World War II global order is bad for the United States, that it's been weaponized against the United States, that the multipolar integrations are the new reality, and that the United States intends to embrace that new reality and work with other partners within a different geopolitical framework. Now, again, I have doubts whether Trump is even, mentally capable of just being one among the peers, or whether he needs to be the top guy. And so this is where I have a doubt. I don't have a doubt about whether he's just going back to where Barack Obama and Joe Biden and his their cabinets left off. I don't think that's the case.
I think the case of North Korea would be interesting to talk about, because we know that even with the case of North Korea, we see one step forward, 10 steps backward. You know what I'm talking about? The same
Yes.
cases happening to Russia and Iran.
Yes.
The outcome, after all, is not something positive.
Well, during his first term, Trump was not very effective at all. And it's not just North Korea. We know from Douglas McGregor, who was personally involved with this, that Trump had the intention of withdrawing U.S. troops from Afghanistan, that he wanted to withdraw U.S. troops from Syria and ultimately even from Europe, and that he has been sabotaged on all those fronts. And then we also know that he has been belted with lawfare, with legal action, with impeachment proceedings, practically through his whole term. And here is where things get extremely interesting, because it was Russiagate, right? He has been dragged through impeachment proceedings over Russiagate. He was being accused of being Vladimir Putin's puppet, that his presidency was practically delegitimized by casting him as the Russian Manchurian candidate, and this weakened his presidency. It sabotaged his intention to improve the relations with Russia and roll back the United States imperial engagements around the world. And now we've seen just last month, this month actually, Tulsi Gabbard come out and disclose a whole bunch of really, really important documents regarding the Russiagate affair. And it is already inevitable, it's already discernible, but it's inevitable that the trail of investigations will lead to London. And this week we already had the head of the Government Accountability Institute, Schweitzer, who said that the whole affair has been cooked up by British intelligence and by the CIA station in London, headed at the time by Gina Haspel, who was sent there by John Brennan. And so inevitably, the British hand in Russiagate will be uncovered and will be made public. And so this is extremely important because, you had this special relationship between Britain and the United States, which has been cultivated for many, many decades, practically since World War I, but especially since the Harry Truman presidency. And it's been cultivated extremely extensively. And Donald Trump is very, very, very aware of that, because Donald Trump understands what happened with Russiagate and where it comes from. Practically every player in Russiagate, aside from the DNC leadership, was a British intelligence asset. And this is still a thing, because this April, one of the main protagonists of Russiagate, Christopher Steele, the man who drew up the dossier against Donald Trump, he actually took Trump to court in London and obtained a judgment in the British court against Donald Trump. And so Trump, this was in April of this year, so Trump is president already. So Trump, according to this judgment, is meant to pay out some nearly £700,000 to Christopher Steele. So he knows, he understands, he's aware of all this. And then Christopher Steele is a big fish in the whole thing. He's not just like some minor former MI6 agent. He was working directly under the guidance of Sir Richard Dearlove, who is the former MI6 head of the MI6. And then he was vetted by former British ambassador to Washington, Sir Kim Derrick. And before he was working on the dodgy dossier, Christopher Steele was involved in Brexit, because they wanted to delegitimize Brexit. So Christopher Steele put together a dossier which supposedly, he wanted to cast doubt on the results of the referendum by contriving a narrative where the Brexit referendum was rigged by the Russians, right? And before that, he was involved with Victoria Nuland on orchestrating the coup in Ukraine. So Christopher Steele has been all over this global geopolitical mess that is pushing us into World War III. and then he personally sued, personally or on behalf of his company Orbis Business Intelligence, I think it's called. He sued Donald Trump and obtained a judgment against Donald Trump, something for damages, reputational damage, whatever it was. But there's no way that Donald Trump is not keenly aware of the British role in this whole mess. Not to mention that in January of this year, and in the aftermath of the 100-year partnership agreement between Ukraine and the United Kingdom, that they've tried to bait Trump into providing a security guarantee for Ukraine with this really cheap, vulgar rare earths resource hustle with Ukraine, where they caused Zelensky. I mean, they sent the Brits basically prepared Zelensky to go to Washington and to offer Trump a $500 billion deal in Ukraine with these rare supposed mineral resources, in order for him to provide a security guarantee to the Kiev government. Well, it didn't work because he hasn't done it. He didn't give them the security guarantee. So that really does change the game, and I think it'll take time for us to really find out what Trump has up his sleeve. But I am quite convinced that things aren't what they seem.
I think we have no doubt that the deep state hates Donald Trump. And a big chunk of deep state is in the United Kingdom. And the way I would argue the new Chancellor of Germany, Macron, is part of that. All these people are the same. But Alex, on the part of Donald Trump, you see no sign that he is willing to help himself, to help his administration. With the Russiagate that you mentioned, you remember those days. He was involved in the case of Russiagate, and at the same time, he was putting a lot of sanctions, sending a lot of weapons to Ukraine. You know what I'm talking about, the outcome, how they can win, they can fight Donald Trump, how can somehow they manage Donald Trump in the United States and his presidency. It seems to me, I'm not talking about Donald Trump himself and the people who are close to him at the base of MAGA, what they're asking for. The problem is that they somehow, with the case of Epstein, you see, Epstein is becoming one of the biggest problem of the administration. Is becoming, and Donald Trump is not doing anything. It's somehow just making things worse. He's not helping his administration. This is the problem. They're somehow getting somewhere to manage Donald Trump.
That's how things appear right now, Ima. I just published an article today on my Substack about that, and one thing I noted about the Epstein affair is I actually never thought that the Epstein files would be made public. I did expect that they would provide a few token heads to roll, some minor players, drag them through the mud, and pretend that justice is being done. But I think that in this case, justice is illusory, and I'll explain why. But more importantly, Epstein spent his career developing this extensive network of very powerful people and putting together compromise against them. And so this is an extremely powerful weapon in the hands of anybody who's able to wield it. And now it's in Trump's hand, essentially. It's his administration that is now running the FBI and the CIA and the whole the 17 or 18 intelligence agencies under Tulsi Gabbard. They have those files, they have those materials, and so that's extremely, extremely powerful as a weapon against your political opponents. And let's face it, the most important fight in the world today is the internal political struggle in the United States between, let's call it, the MAGA and the globalists, right? The people who want the United States to return to its Republican roots and be an industrial powerhouse and be a sovereign country, versus those who want the United States to be the enforcement arm of the global, essentially British Empire. And so, to prevail in that fight, you need all the help you can get. So releasing Epstein files to the public would render that weapon useless in that political fight. So this is the reason why I believe that the Epstein files, I always thought so, were not going to be released. Now, the way Trump and his administration have handled it has been really poor, from the public relations point of view. But all this happened strangely in the immediate aftermath of him getting his big beautiful bill passed, and that was extremely important because that solidifies his political background, his political base, meaning he's now more powerful and he's now more secure in wielding power in the United States than he was before the big beautiful bill. This is also the reason why he needed Lindsey Graham and why he put up with Graham's revolting antics. And so, with regard to Epstein files and the notion that they were going to lead to any kind of justice, I think that that's illusory. That's an illusion, because whether we like it or not, in the West in general, not just the United States, we have a two-tier justice system where the insiders, the system's insiders, are treated far, far more leniently than ordinary people. So if you're an insider, then you're very likely to get off free, no matter what crime you commit. So it's not very frequent that some big player, like a bank CEO or CFO, ever go to prison, regardless of what happens, or some political insider like Mike Pompeo or Barack Obama, or Jake Sullivan, people like this, Hillary Clinton, Donald Rumsfeld, Dick Cheney. They're not subject to justice in the same way as ordinary people are, and an ordinary person can get a stiff prison sentence even for minor offenses. And with regards to Epstein files, we already had a case of Virginia Giuffre, I think was her last name, took Prince Andrew to court, and it never went to court. It was settled out of court, and so there was a payout. But at the end of the day, 3 years later, Prince Andrew is a free man, and Virginia Giuffre is dead. So the fact that those files being out in the open would lead to justice is, at best it's questionable. I think it's a delusion. Okay, so now we go back to Russiagate. I think that Russiagate is going to prove absolutely massive in its impact ultimately on global geopolitics, on international relations, especially on the special relationship between Britain and the United States, and Britain's standing in the world. Because Britain doesn't have standing. Its standing was on the shoulders of the United States. They have no military. They are economically and financially in an absolutely catastrophic state, and so they only get to play their role through proxies, and their most powerful proxy has been the United States. And I think that Russiagate is going to prove kryptonite for that relationship. And I think that the Epstein files are part of that, because the Epstein files are going to force cooperation from many powerful people who are going to have to choose between freedom and cooperating versus remaining loyal to the globalist cause and then suffering the consequences in whatever way. And I think that even now we can observe this because there would be many clients of Jeffrey Epstein who should be screaming at the top of their lungs against Trump. Remember how it was in the first term. The whole media PR big tech complex was nonstop beating up on Trump, nonstop. Now they're very, very quiet, and I think there's a reason for that. And I wouldn't be surprised if the Epstein files aren't that reason.
Alex, Donald Trump, 2 days ago, we had Medvedev coming out saying to Lindsey Graham and Donald Trump, it's not for you to decide, to dictate what we're going to do in Ukraine. And Donald Trump tweeted yesterday, he said that he called Medvedev the fake president of Russia. It's unbelievable. The guy is he wants to fight each and everybody. And this is the problem, Alex. Don't you think this is a huge problem for the president of the United States to get into fight with Medvedev? He knows that he says Medvedev is nobody in Russia, but he knows that Medvedev is the most important person after the Russian president Vladimir Putin. He knows that what Medvedev says is the other part of the argument of Russian president. Russian president, we know that Vladimir Putin is not interested in these sort of talks, but Medvedev knows how to put the policy of Russia in some sort of reaction or response to the United States in these tweets that he's doing. But considering Donald Trump getting into the fight and calling him personally, because Medvedev was talking about the case of Ukraine, he was not attacking Donald Trump. But Donald Trump coming out, attacking him, attacking his personality, his presidency. This is something so unbelievable. This is, how do you find, don't you think that Donald Trump is somehow showing the deep state, I'm prepared to play your game. Come here. I'm prepared to do it for you.
That's exactly right, Nima. That is exactly right. And I think that this is exactly what it is. I think it's irrelevant, the trash talk you see between Medvedev and Trump and whoever on these two sides. It's distraction, it's noise, it's exactly for the consumption of their domestic audiences. And I like by domestic audiences, I don't mean the average voter, but exactly the deep state, the people who are cold warriors at heart, who want hostility, who like to hate on Russia, who practically made their self-identity as someone who fights communism, and they still think that Russia is communist. So when Trump does this, they think like, yes, look, Trump is finally being tough and showing them who's the boss and so on. It's all nonsense. I don't think anything is going to come out of this. I would give more importance to the recent statement by Nikolai Patrushev, who was asked recently about the provocations in the Baltic region. Because this NATO general, this absolute ridiculous failure of a NATO general, Donahue, was talking about, like we can push the Russians out of Kaliningrad, we can take control of Kaliningrad easily, quickly. Donahue has already proven his ability to fail with these cockamamie military operations, which he had a chance to prove himself in Ukraine, and he caused a complete and total disaster there. Anyway, Patrushev, go back to Patrushev because that's the point. Patrushev said that it's the British who are always behind these false flag attacks, and that they are they have centuries worth of experience in orchestrating or false flag attacks exactly in order to pit powers one against the other so that they push them into war. And right now they are desperate to derail the relationship, a positive relationship between the United States and Russia. And so again, we have to ask ourselves: is Trump aware of that, or is he just blundering about, falling into every pitfall and buying into every provocation that is thrown his way? I personally don't think so. I think this is too dumb. It is too glib and shallow, and I think that these provocations are by now so obvious that I doubt that even Kaja Kallas would fall for it, let alone Donald Trump, who does have some intelligent and experienced people to advise him on all these things. And I think that at the moment, there is no question that Russia is winning the battle for Eurasia. They're winning the battle for control of Eastern Europe. And there's nothing the United States can do about this. The United States cannot reverse this. And so if you're looking at that situation, are you going to side with the loser? With the losers, not just Britain, but the whole EU and NATO? Or are you going to look to side with the winners and cut deals with them because they are in the driver's seat now? So if you want to get a seat at the table, you need to make nice with Russia and with China. And Trump is trying to make nice with Russia and China, in spite of this, I'm disappointed in Vladimir Putin. I give him 50 days, I give him 10 days, I give him 12 days. I don't think any of this matters a whole lot at all. And when the 12 days expire, then what? What is he going to do? I think he must know that there's nothing he can do, actually. And then, he's been imposing tariffs left and right, secondary tariffs against people who dare to trade with Russia. This, again, is so colossally idiotic. It can't possibly be what it seems at the surface. And what it is Trump taking advantage of politically expedient pretexts to do what he wanted to do anyway, and that is impose tariffs on foreign trade. And the reason he's doing that is not to punish China, to punish India, to punish Russia. He's doing that because he wants to create protective barriers for American manufacturers. He wants to. This is what he's been saying for a long time. He wants to bring industry and manufacturing back to the United States. How do you do that? You impose tariffs against imported goods. And so now, a lot of people are saying, he's creating a disaster because the price for that won't be paid by China and India and so forth. Obviously, that's the case. The price will be paid by U.S. importers and by the U.S. consumer. Well, yes and no. The importers, Trump already wants out of the equation because he wants manufacturers instead of importers as the foundation of his economy. And then the U.S. consumer will very quickly have the choice of buying U.S. manufactured goods rather than imported goods. Now, this is going to cause inflation. Yes, that's true. But you're going to have inflation anyway. And it's not like this system of open free trade is sustainable. It's not sustainable anyhow. So preserving this doesn't make sense. If it runs its course, it's going to collapse. And so you have the choice of, maybe we can push it over, collapse it deliberately, and create a level field for American manufacturers to compete. And so I think that, this is something that Trump has stated explicitly, that this is his intention, and he's doing it. Only he's not doing it by saying we're closing the United States to free trade. He's using all these daily events in the geopolitical arena to give himself the pretext to do what he wants to do anyway.
I think the question would be, why would Europe go after a deal with the United States that would somehow would be disastrous for Europe? And this is the question that, in my opinion, when it comes to Donald Trump, he would be satisfied with the deal because he's going to receive whatever. I don't know if Europeans would afford that. Would somehow, do they have the money to give it to Donald Trump? This is the problem. And something is so amazing. The United States doesn't have the weapons to sell to Europe. And Europe is buying something from the United States that they don't have the money to pay the United States. It's something, amazing the way that they're talking about it, and the real outcome of the deal. How can be, in my opinion, Alex, when I see the scene, when I see both sides, Europe cannot afford it. The United States cannot afford the weapons. They cannot send it to Europe. The only thing that I see the deep state is somehow managing Donald Trump just to let the time goes by and they continue the conflict in Ukraine. They know that in the next 3 years, Donald Trump, there would be no Donald Trump. We don't have Donald Trump in office in the United States. It's all gone. And they can get somebody in the United States who's totally in line with them.
Yes, correct. And I think that the main outcome of the trade deal with Europe, to which Ursula von der Leyen committed, is to strip the European Union of legitimacy and to show that that the European Union is the European Union cannot provide advantage and protection to individual sovereign national European economies. That was the idea, to combine in a bloc. You are supposed to become stronger. You're supposed to have a bigger, more powerful negotiating position. And I think that Trump just demonstrated that this was all a children's tale. And he absolutely humiliated Ursula von der Leyen. I don't even know how he was able to pull this off. She agreed to something she cannot even deliver. You're right to point out they don't have the money to do this. This was absolutely staggering. I wonder how he coerced her to agree to $750 billion in energy resources over 3 years. This is several fold what the EU is importing from the United States at the moment. What are they going to do with all this? And that's at very high prices, And then 600 billion euros worth of dollars worth of investments in the United States. Well, that already eats up, most of the the Rearm Europe program. They've already spent it practically. So, that whole thing, we're going to spread money to European contractors and we're going to grow European economy on the basis of, rearmament push. They already spent this with Trump. And so, she agreed to something that she had no legitimate right to agree with, which strips the EU and its presidency and the European Commission of its legitimacy. And it makes it very obvious because now every individual European country will get to say, no, we do not accept this. And, France, there's been very heavy criticism of this in France, in Hungary, in Germany. And I think that no amount of PR is going to make this okay. So I think that, this will prove the moment when the EU ship struck the iceberg, to use, the Titanic analogy. And so I think this is the important aspect of this deal, not because this deal will actually hold. It probably won't, but it'll cause it'll be the it'll be the apple of discord, which might ultimately lead the European Union to tear itself apart. And it might also prove the end of NATO, because what now? NATO is going to be arming itself with U.S. weapons, even though United States commitment to NATO is on the wane. The whole thing doesn't make any sense anymore, and I think that what happened on Sunday in Scotland was the emperor has no clothes moment.
Yeah. He's not interested in having a meeting with Vladimir Putin, he mentioned. And 10 days, the deadline has moved to 10 days. And he knows, he said, on the other hand, he said he knows that the tariffs may not work against Russia, but after all, he's willing to impose these tariffs on India and China. China already said that they're not going to care about what the United States is thinking of, because they, after all, their security, their national interest comes first. How about India? How do you feel that 25%? It's not just India, Alex. We have 50% tariffs on Brazil. And it's when we look at the big picture of what's going on, it's somehow an attack on BRICS. Because look at Brazil, look at India, China, Russia, Iran. It's all about, and putting the concept of this economic attack, this sort of attitude on the part of the Trump administration, and considering what's going on in the region, significantly in the southern part of the southern flank of Russia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia. It's all deep state, Alex. I don't care what Donald Trump wants to do, but he's playing in the hand of deep state. He's doing whatever they want him to do. Even he agrees with them, he doesn't agree with them. Don't you think that these countries, after all, they're going to talk to each other? They're going to find a solution for what's going on with the Trump administration. Do you feel that the concept of making America great again is already gone with the Trump administration?
Well, no, not necessarily. I think that this is, again, he's doing exactly what he wanted to do. He's not, he's pretending that he's punishing Russia and China and India and other countries, but he's using that as an excuse to impose trade barriers because he wants to reindustrialize the United States. Is he going to be successful? We don't know, but it is true that the United States has a very powerful economic dynamism. There's a very strong entrepreneurial culture in the United States, and if you give them the even terrain to compete, they will probably be successful. But then you're going to need to trade with other countries again. Then you're going to have to, if you're going to be an exporter again of manufactured goods, you're still going to have to make nice with China and with India and with Iran and Russia and Europe. And so there's a there's a big chance of unintended consequences in all this. And then, I don't want to absolve Trump from massive blunders that he has committed in his political career. One of them was the assassination of Qasem Soleimani. Is that? Yeah.
Yeah.
One of them was the United States unilaterally walking out of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, which is one of the worst blunders that any leader could have made, because those are exactly the most dangerous weapons to the world peace, and it removes certain.
We had INF Treaty as well, Alex.
Yeah. That's what I mean. INF, Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty.
Yeah.
Yeah. that was in 2019. That was him.
Yeah.
That was Donald Trump's first term. And now, they are deploying nuclear missiles in Britain, which, okay, they're going to be under U.S. control. It's not something that the British can, launch at their discretion. But still, it does put world peace at risk. What is his intent with this? Does he want to go and start a nuclear war? Again, that is so idiotic that I can't help thinking there must be another rationale for that. And I think that maybe that rationale will be to provide a pretext for nuclear disarmament talks. We'll find out, but I don't know. Anyway, I think that Trump is fighting a very, very tough fight. Whether he has just rolled over for the deep state and made himself their errand boy, we will only know in time. But I'm not convinced. I think that a lot of what Trump does amounts to deception. Not deception of the Russians or Chinese, but deception of his allies and his deep state, which basically wants him dead. And I know from I had a few days ago I had a podcast with Susan Kokinda of the Promethean Action in the United States, and she's very active in Michigan Republican Party. And during our conversation, she told me two details that I thought were probably significant. This was in the late stages of the presidential elections. And she said that at the meeting they had at the Republican caucus, Trump actually explicitly invited the attendees to join him, and this is the words that she used, in a final battle against the global financier class. This is the words that she used, and according to her, this is exactly what Trump was saying to the attendees at this campaign event. And then another thing she told me was that during some of the recent meetings of his cabinet, he was making a point of referring to American geopolitical adversaries as our supposed enemies. And he was also saying the people that are perceived as our enemies. There's words have meaning, and why he chose to use these words, we don't know, but he did. And there must be a reason for that. And then to invite his supporters to join him in a final battle against the global financier elite, well, that's you wouldn't come up with that if you didn't mean it, because nobody's asking for this. You could always talk against the Democrats. You could always say that Obama and Biden, they're communists and this and that, and they brought us into war. You wouldn't need to come up with the statement final battle against global financier elites. That came out of Trump's mouth allegedly. I don't think that Mrs. Kokinda would be lying about this. That would be very random. But I think that these statements have meaning, and I have to give Trump the benefit of the doubt that he actually means what he says. And then, the implication is that he's taking on the most powerful people in the world. And how are you going to do that? Well, they assassinated Abraham Lincoln, William McKinley, JFK, RFK, MLK. They attempted they made two assassination attempts at Trump. You're going to have to wage that war by deception. and that deception has to be convincing, right? And to be convincing, you can't shout, whisper to everybody, oh hey, look, I'm gonna screw them over, here's what I'm gonna do. You have to work basically like an undercover cop. Everybody has to assume that you're with the bad guys, that you're one of their key players, and that's the only way you're going to get to the, to break the most important power nodes in those relationships. So, am I, people often say that I give him too much credit. I don't know, because nobody knows. I'm just saying I have to consider this to be the case because it's possible. And as far as we know, it's a 50-50 thing. You know, either I'm right or I'm wrong. But nobody knows, because obviously there's a great deal of obfuscation and deception going on. So even people who say like, oh look, there's these documents and there's these defense doctrines and blah blah. That still is not conclusive. We simply do not know. That's really the case.
Alex, I really believe that in the aftermath of World War II and the Cold War, the United States has become the father of the family. And what's going on right now, it seems that the kids have grown, the wife is not the same wife, and everybody is getting stronger and got stronger and more successful in the way that they're living. And but the father is old, he doesn't care about the kids, he doesn't want to understand the reality has changed. The same, you look at the United States today, they know that the world has changed. Anthony Blinken said that before leaving Washington, said the reason that the tariffs or the sanctions are not working is because the world has changed. You look at the way that Donald Trump and the Trump administration is trying to deal. How can they fight? Let's assume that militarily or economically. We know what has happened during the tariff war between the United States and China. The United States, after all, has decided to talk with China. Xi Jinping didn't call Trump. This is the fact. This shows how the world has changed, how the power, how these China is it's a big economy. On the other hand, Alex, militarily, look at Ukraine. The United States sent a lot of weapons, Europeans all together. They did everything for Ukraine. They
Yeah.
had I would argue, the stronger or somehow the most formidable forces that they can find in Europe were these Ukrainians, 700 Ukrainians fighting Russia. They were prepared between 2014 and 2021 by NATO to fight Russia. They couldn't achieve anything. Look at the way, I don't know if you saw the article on CNN. They say that in 12 days of war between Iran and Israel, the United States has used 25% of the THAAD missiles, the latest, one of the most, yeah, I don't know, advanced air defense
Expensive,
system. Yeah,
expensive, not necessarily
expensive.
advanced, but expensive. Yes.
Yeah, but because they were bragging about that, they didn't give it to Ukraine, but Israel is different. Let's give it to Israel because that
Yeah.
would be game changer. It's different and all of that. You know, they cannot afford the fight, but they don't understand that economically and militarily is not the case anymore for the United States to fight. I would argue the father to fight his children or his wife. You know, we are, after all, we are a family, in my opinion. We have to understand each other because other than that, we cannot achieve any sort of peace. You look at what is happening in the Middle East. Nobody can ignore what's going on. Starvation and the way that Israel is behaving. When this how can this reality hit the United States? I don't know, when the case of Ukraine cannot bring some sort of sanity to the United States. What's going on in Israel? What's going on with the case of Iran, with China, with India? It doesn't seem that there is a learning curve in the United States. This is the problem, in my opinion.
I think that everything you just said is absolutely correct. And not only is it absolutely correct, it is very obvious, which is exactly the reason why I think that Trump's positioning doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And so then, you come to the question, are these people completely stupid? Or are they playing a very different game from what they pretend to be playing? This is where my confusion comes from, because I see this as this is so idiotic, they can't possibly mean this. Because if it's obvious to me, like how obvious is it going to be to Pentagon generals who have very detailed, precise information about what's going on? And like they're Patriots and THAADs and all these things. They were the world's most advanced weapon systems back in the early 1990s. But now it's 35 years later, and they can't stop Iranian missiles. They can't stop Yemeni missiles. They can't stop Russian missiles. Never mind these swarms of drones that are being developed at a very rapid pace. So you can't possibly stay rigidly entrenched in a Cold War mentality, and you can't be aware that you actually have no leg to stand on. Which is why I try to always think, what are they really doing? We see what they're saying for public consumption, but they can't not see what we're all seeing. And so this is why, when in the second half of June, when there was this buildup to U.S. attack on Iran, I thought, this is suicidal. This is completely idiotic. They can't do this, because the upside was nothing, right? If you get lucky, maybe you regime change Iran, but it's a long shot. But you have a downside risk of the situation completely going out of control, of you losing 2 or 3 aircraft carrier strike groups and getting 20 of your bases in the Middle East wiped out, and some 60,000 soldiers. So they can't possibly mean this. And so I said at the time, either there's going to be a no attack, or we're going to get like a telegraphed, prearranged attack, kind of like in the World Wrestling Federation style, when you make a big show of violence, but nothing actually happens. And then I said, we will know for sure only when the Iranians retaliate, because it's going to be a telegraphed fake retaliation. And that's exactly what happened. And so this is where, I'm looking at this war of words. I'm looking at everybody's trash talk, which, you also get trash talk in World Wrestling Federation. And if you took it seriously, you would think like, wow, these guys really hate each other and there's going to be a big fight here. But it's all for show. So it seems to me that the same thing is happening on the geopolitical arena. And the reason why it's happening is because there are very, very powerful political constituencies that need to be appeased. And rather than telling them, no, we're not going to attack Iran because that's stupid, they launch a fake attack and they call up Iranians and they say like, look, we're terribly sorry, but we have to do this. We're going to drop a few bombs here, here, and here. You have 2 days to, remove the crystal and the silverware so nothing gets damaged, right? But we have to do this anyway. And we understand that you're going to have to retaliate. So please be so kind to call us up first and tell us where exactly, so that we can move our soldiers out of harm's way and then we're going to both, retreat. We're going to do some more trash talk. We're going to declare victory. And all of these, Zionist and evangelical fanatics are going to be, we can put them to sleep. And then we're going to talk other things. So it seems to me that the real politics are more in this vein than they are in the vein of actual hostilities. But the groups who want the real actual hostilities, they're real and they're powerful, and they are lobbying relentlessly in Israel, in the United States, in Europe, in London, and so forth. And so, you have to dodge those bullets. And I think, unfortunately, Trump does blunder in important ways. Again, as we said, the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, the cancellation of the INF treaty in 2019. Those were terrible, unforgivable mistakes. But anyway, the world goes on, and hopefully, the Russians understand what's going on, and it seems that they do understand. The Chinese probably understand as well, and that there will be time when everybody will be sitting at the table. Trump with Trump with Putin, and with Xi Jinping, and a new security architecture for the world is going to be set up. What we have to avoid is a nuclear war, and we know that right now the British are desperately trying to instigate a nuclear exchange somewhere, whether it's going to be Israelis, whether it's going to be Pakistanis, whether it's going to be the Russians, the Ukrainians, whoever, but they want a nuclear device to go off somewhere to cause complete chaos, so they can hopefully emerge again as the reasonable ones, as the peacemakers, and then dictate the terms of peace and reimpose themselves as the leading power of the world. That's the risk.
I think a lot gonna happen because Cambodia and Thailand. How
Yes.
can you imagine something like that would pop up? And it's unbelievable.
Yes, I didn't see it coming. I don't know anybody who saw it coming. Maybe, I don't know, Brian Berletich is paying attention to that part of the world, so I think that he was probably a lot less surprised than I was. But it's popping up all over the place. Azerbaijan antagonizing Russia, Azerbaijan antagonizing Iran, India, Pakistan, the coup in Bangladesh, Bangladesh, Myanmar. It's all over the place, and it's all happening along the insecurity setup that traces back to the British Empire, because this is how they decided to preserve their hegemony on the whole Eurasian continent, by simply creating this arch of crisis that stretches the whole continent, practically from the Baltics down to the Eastern Mediterraneans, and then across all the way to the Koreas, where you can detonate a conflict practically at any point, at any place, any region. And they're doing it now because, their main game has been Ukraine. That's the far and away the most important conflict that they instigated, because it was meant to destabilize and regime change Russia. It didn't work out. So then they had to detonate a conflict in the Middle East. And now we know, because we have Israeli court records, that the Israeli patrols were called to stand down on 7th October. And I've been convinced since the October 7th that whole event was a false flag cooked up between Western intelligence with the Hamas elite sitting in luxury in Doha, Qatar, and Israeli intelligence. And the whole idea was to spark a regional war in the Middle East. Well, that didn't do the that didn't get the World War II going. And so now, as that is failing as well, they're trying with Azerbaijan, they're trying with between India and Pakistan, now Cambodia and Thailand. Who knows? Maybe they'll try the Koreas or wherever. They these people are arsonists of peace. And the more I study these conflicts, the more convinced I'm. The Balkans. The Balkans are going to be one of the crisis flashpoints if they can get a war going here. I'm becoming increasingly convinced that if you quarantine the British foreign policy establishment and their very, very extremely extensive network of non-government organizations and private contractors and diplomatic staff that are everywhere around the world and embedded in governments in these key flashpoints, that you would actually solve probably overnight greater than 90% of the whole world's problem. They are the arsonist of peace in the world.
You know what's so amazing, Alex? I remember the day after October 7th, I talked with Paul Carrick-Roberts. He said that this is a false flag operation. This is
Yes.
Israel permitting the same. It's unbelievable. The only person who said that to me on this podcast was Paul Carrick-Roberts. And he said there is no possibility for Hamas doing this without the Israelis providing everything to facilitate the attack.
Yes, I have a friend who worked in Israeli intelligence, military intelligence, and their task was the security perimeter around Gaza. And this person told me on the same day that there is no way in the world that this could have happened without active cooperation of the Israeli security forces. So it was impossible. And then, I looked on social media, and in the immediate aftermath of October 7th, there was a number of Israeli soldiers and veterans who posted videos on TikTok, on Facebook, on YouTube, and elsewhere, who said the same thing. And not only did they say the same thing, they provided very concrete reasons and explanations for why this couldn't have possibly happened the way it was described to us. So it was obviously a false flag attack orchestrated in order to get that war going.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Alex, for being with us today. Great pleasure.
Always a pleasure, Nima. Thank you for the invite, and until the next time.
See you soon. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.